Okay, we are going to get started, everybody, with some introductory slides before I hand it over to our presenters. Welcome to our third webinar of our spring series. Today, we're going to be discussing non-traditional workers and the stormwater industry, conversation on diversity and inclusion with Kala Fleming and Rebecca Stack. And my name is Michelle Berry, and I am with Chesapeake Stormwater Network, and I am our Stormwater Program Coordinator. I'm sure we're all very familiar with webinars at this point, but just a couple of reminders. The webinar will be recorded. I'll stop the recording at our Q&A section at the end of our presentation. But that's so that the presentation will go up onto our website. I try to get them up by the end of the week. We will do a quick poll question today, just right at the top after this slide, so you can engage with that directly on the screen. Any questions and comments that you have, we're going to facilitate those at the end of our presentation at around 12:45. So you can put those into the chat. You can also use the Q&A feature, and I'll be facilitating that at the end. And as always, at CSN, we appreciate your feedback. So I will put a survey link into the chat at the end of our presentation today, just so that you can, say anything that you need to say. Let us know what you'd like to see in future webinars. That feedback is always appreciated. So that being said, I'm going to put our poll questions up. We've just got a couple here. Are you familiar with Chesapeake Stormwater Network? Where is your location? Either where you work or where you live, however you want to answer that. But where do you spend the most time? What is your current affiliation? What is your stormwater experience? And finally, if you work in stormwater for your role, how common is it for you to be involved in staffing for maintenance needs? So if you can take just a moment to answer those questions, they will feed into our presentation today. And if anyone wants to elaborate as well on that last question for our presenters, feel free to elaborate in the chat. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Looks like most folks have responded. And I can share our results. So as far as familiarity with CSN, we've got sort of a mix there, which is always good. I'm going to talk about CSN in just a moment. Got a lot of folks coming from Maryland, Virginia, and PA today, but a couple of others. And I'm going to skip down to the last one, actually, because I know we wanted to talk about that. So as far as maintenance goes, we have many, about 35%, saying never, 30% occasionally, and 25% frequently. And again, feel free to elaborate on any of those if you would like. And real quick, for those of you who may have been forwarded this webinar and don't really know what the Chesapeake Stormwater does, we are an organization. My polls popped back up. We are an organization of over 11,000 stormwater professionals in the Chesapeake Bay region and beyond. And our mission is to provide training and resources to celebrate successes in stormwater, in innovation, and also to share best practices out with our network. What does it mean to join the network? Joining the network is free. It basically subscribes you to our monthly newsletter where we share successes, innovations, and resources that we have on our website. So if you're interested in learning more about Chesapeake Stormwater Network, you can find all of this information on our website, and I definitely encourage you to join our newsletter. And real quick, our upcoming webinars at CSN, we do have 2 more great webinars in the series. So if you don't know about these, we have one. We're taking a little bit of a break. So we're kicking back off next month in April, Transforming IDDE with 2 folks from the city of Rockville. And then we have a soil health webinar with Dr. Shreer Inamdar and Dr. Joseph Galella at the end of April as well. So 2 very exciting, very different topics. And finally, if you are unaware, CSN also offers trainings, and we do have the capacity to schedule a few more trainings. In 2024, we do these both virtually or on site. We cover a wide range of topics. So if this is of interest to you, feel free to reach out to myself or to email us via our website. I'll put my information in the chat before the end of this presentation as well. So finally, we're going to get into our presentation, Non-Traditional Workers and the Stormwater Industry, a conversation on diversity and inclusion. I'm very excited about this presentation today. I'm going to introduce our speakers. First, we have Dr. Kala Fleming. She is an innovator and engineer on a mission to democratize green jobs. She launched Frontline Gig to connect untapped entry-level talent to the $3 trillion green jobs ecosystem of workforce programs, apprenticeships, and full-time work using paid hourly gigs. In the process, her team is helping employers and training programs up to 10 times their reach and upskilling speed and enabling them to take a chance on more individuals who are coming to climate with non-traditional backgrounds. Then we have Rebecca Stack, who is a civil engineer, educator, and principal of Designgreen LLC, an engineering consultancy firm offering technical support services that layer ecological principles and engineering practices with outreach experience to revitalize the urban landscape and create resilient, environmentally aware communities. So with that, I will turn it over to your slides, Kala and Rebecca.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's see. It'll take me 2 seconds.
No problem.
In the beginning. How's that?
Looks great.
So a warm thank you to Michelle and the Chesapeake Stormwater Network for inviting us to give this talk. We're excited to share. I think it's a fairly unique experience that Kala and I have together. So we're going to be, as Michelle described, sharing with you a specific experience and then talking more generally about this platform that Frontline offers. So building on-ramps to attract non-traditional workers to stormwater. And we hope it to be a conversation, but I'm going to drop the slides. All right. So just to put it in context, and probably everyone on the call, but maybe not, has a sense that there's a growing demand in the industry for labor force. And there are really big numbers forecast, both at the sort of manual labor level and at the sort of, engineer kind of top of the ladder. So that there's not just a demand for folks that understand green infrastructure and stormwater management, but also it's a real ladder for careers. So there's this challenge that there's an escalating labor need. So as jurisdictions are increasingly installing green infrastructure for stormwater management, whether it's an MS4 or combined sewer, whether it's climate resiliency or some combination of the three, these are going to be very prevalent. And what we're talking about is not so much the installation, but the long-term maintenance of this. So not only is the number of green infrastructure installations large now and ever increasing, but many of these are in high visibility, high traffic areas. So while programs may be developing schedules, maintenance schedules, and budgets associated with it, even if they're able to meet sort of the traditional conventional approach to the maintenance demands, there are these highly visible sort of off-schedule obligations that are going to be cropping up that we've experienced here in DC and in the surrounding communities in Northern Virginia and Maryland, where it's unacceptable to wait till the next scheduled maintenance. So what we're going to talk about is potentially a proactive inspection that supplements your conventional. It gives you the flexibility and the nimbleness to respond to these kind of proactive demands. And we're going to talk about how that is also not just an on-ramp for solving, not just a vehicle for solving this kind of volume of maintenance and need for more workers, but an on-ramp for non-traditional workers that may never have connected with the industry in any other way. We're also going to talk a bit about how this project that we've been working on together kind of blurs the lines between learning and work, and the opportunity to scale for career awareness. And there's some pretty interesting stories about untapped talent that are now, now they're plugged into the stormwater industry. So again, I mean, Michelle gave us a pretty thorough intro, but I'm Rebecca Stack. I am a stormwater civil engineer. I worked for many years in district government for the DC's Department of Energy and Environment. Worked in the nonprofit industry for a little bit and then started my own business, Designgreen. We're a small firm based in DC and we work throughout the Chesapeake Bay. We do policy work and education and design work. And I am also a native of DC, and I was really excited to be able to work boots on the ground with Kala. So Kala, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Kala. And so Frontline Gig is a workforce development platform that uses hourly gigs. So our take is from gig economy models like Uber, and we're using those gigs to connect individuals who are untapped. They didn't know they belonged to the industry, but we connect them to green jobs, training programs, and to entry-level openings in the industry. And so the process of doing a gig is an assessment opportunity and a learning opportunity. And so the nugget that really started this idea was the observation in stormwater, and we work beyond stormwater today, but the inspiration was looking at the challenge around labor in stormwater that was coming from many municipalities turning to green stormwater infrastructure to be a part of their system. And so increasingly, and I think as many of you know, the traditional system is meant for it's much more tailored towards concrete than it is for things that look like gardens. And so when you increasingly add gardens, that comes with the need for manual labor. So we asked a very simple question. It was like, well, who's going to maintain these? Like, once you put the gardens in, like, who does that? And so we had a ton of conversations with green stormwater managers around the country. And the most interesting and funny stories of fails that essentially tied back to labor came up. And it was either a labor challenge or somehow the funding didn't come at the right time. And so, a lot of the traditional crews were still kind of getting up to speed on, needing, on maintaining these things. And, they know how to use weed whackers versus do hand weeding. But lots of really funny stories, even in some of the most maybe sophisticated systems that you would think, whether it's New York or San Francisco. So ultimately with this idea, luckily I found really great partners in DC. So Rebecca, and then we have another partner who you'll hear about later. And we were able to get a grant from DC DOE to sort of move this idea from being, oh, maybe we could use, gig workers to supplement the labor force to actually doing it in practice. So I'll pass it back to you, Rebecca, to kind of, delve in a little bit more.
Thank you, Kala. Yeah, so before we sort of really get into the what the project is, I think it's valuable to kind of think about what the green infrastructure, the green stormwater infrastructure is that we're talking about. So we're working in the public space, we're working ground level. Some of the practices may be as tiny as these little sort of micro spaces around, plantings around the trees. That's a spot in Baltimore. Some of them may be really long, thin, narrow bioswale, sort of bioplanters, like the one in DC, right under the 295 highway on the new Malcolm X trail. This is almost, I think, 3 miles of bioretention that sort of run adjacent, and it's very difficult to maintain because it's high-speed traffic on the other side. Some of it may be green roofs, and then some of it may be sort of more conventional, kind of low density bioretention. We also have some that are in parks, kind of adjacent to streets. But there's kind of less parking pressure and less fast traffic. So it's a real mix of the kinds of facilities we're looking at. Yeah, this is just kind of like a proof that we have a problem. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is estimated that it's going to add 9 million new green jobs over the next 10 years. And that's not all stormwater green infrastructure maintenance, but a portion of it is. And we're already having challenges staffing, with the current limited pool. So we really need to cast our eyes wider. And build in systems that allow us to attract a wider, more diverse talent pool. Kala, did you want to say anything additional on this slide?
No, that's great. And I think it's just for the employers that are sort of looking ahead and thinking about, how are we already have the challenge of, sort of the older workers who are aging out and taking their knowledge with them. But with the new generation that is coming on stream, we have a lot of needs within our systems, but there's a lot of distraction that younger talent is facing. So they're on tap for several reasons, right? So one is that they haven't gotten an explicit call from the industry, but they also can do YouTube, they also can do many of the other things. There's a lot of choice. And so how, as stormwater systems, the stormwater systems of the future are going to have to be more intentional. And I think, as you really aptly said, think long-term about what are going to be the ladders of opportunity that they provide to really sort of build talent pipelines over the long term.
Yeah, and we have a great example of that coming up. So we'll just say briefly some details about the pilot that we have going in DC. And this is anchored in Oxen Run, for those of you familiar with DC's Oxen Run Park. We're in the DC side of it, not the National Parks Service side. And it's funded through a DOEE grant, which provides the team funding for education, for technical expertise, for actual labor. We are paying the gig workers. it's not a volunteer effort. We're paying them to participate in training as well as in cleanup efforts and other more sophisticated things, actions. So the goal of from our perspective, when we applied for the funding, our goal was to really demonstrate that it was a viable platform that the city could use. And there were a lot of kinks to work out when we first got started, including sort of, were we somehow infringing on like the existing government sort of union labor force at Department of Public Works? Were we infringing on the existing volunteer corporate effort, cleanup efforts? There were kind of like a bunch of things that we had to, hoops that we had to jump through to assure folks that this was supplementing, not negating their efforts. And I guess there's this mentor piece that we really do want to talk a lot about, because it's a big piece of it. So it's not just hands-on work supervision, it's mentorship. It's not just getting out there and training, running a training. It's really a longer conversation about career ladders. And it's an easy technology for people who are, younger to figure out how to use. So it's easy to get them. So this is our team. We have, not joining us today is Wade and Crystal from TCG Property Cares. They are a critical part of this effort because they're the landscaping company. They provide the equipment, they provide the trucks. They have a field superintendent that kind of is there to provide oversight. But it's more than that. As I said, they are mentors and they are looking to staff. So it creates a sense of reality. My team is there to act as educators and to help people who are in the gig, just picking up gig work routinely, which is sort of every Monday in Oxen Run, we're doing trash pickups. And if they want to elevate their skills, we run quarterly trainings that get them sort of up that ladder. And then there's Crystal and her team. Kala and her team, I'm sorry. So when we first got started, we had a bunch of metrics that we were being evaluated against, whether or not this was going to be a successful effort. And this is the first year. We had 30 workers in the pipeline. We did 3 community stakeholder engagement events. We removed 2 tons of invasive species and 4 tons. So twice the metric that we were supposed to achieve. Oh, and 3 times the metric in terms of the pipeline. So they asked us to do 30 workers and we had more than 100 participate. We're in the 3rd year now, and we've added some more trainings. So there's sort of more steps to the career ladder and more tuned gig workers to the needs of what the city has. Yeah, so yeah, like our routine weekly pickups are around 100 pounds of litter in this one small section of the park, which has high traffic, high visibility. But then there are these kind of extreme days where we have as much as 2,000 pounds, like the day after July 4th. And then in the later versions, we are getting into not just picking up litter, but the folks that are showing up routinely and they want more education. We're doing invasive species training. And we're doing green infrastructure maintenance, sort of entry-level training. Yeah, so looking at plans. Kala, do you want to talk a bit about, this is sort of a case study that we have of one of the gig workers who I think really is a good snapshot of what is possible.
Yes. So for the untapped talent that we look to attract, one of the core demographics is represented by someone, you know, that fits a Darnell profile. In fact, we sort of name our profiles according to that. We have, and in addition, so Darnell is high school grad, hasn't been to college, and at the moment, you know, he is sort of bouncing around a little bit, doing a lot of freelancing kind of work. And so he heard about Frontline and the opportunity to join the app and specifically work in Oxen Run from a posting on Craigslist. We have partnerships with other organizations as well for how people would discover us to come work with us. And in general, you know, for any of our limitations with the work in DC, we have more people who want to work than we have opportunities. And so one of our ongoing pain points is to, in any of the communities where we work, to scale the number of training opportunities faster. So with a Darnell, he heard about a paid training opportunity for 2 hours. And so he's like, why not? Sign me up. I'm looking for ways to kind of hustle and make some money. And I think he says he wants to make money like it's not funny. Like that's his whole mantra. So he came out, the vibe was good. And so on a Monday, and then he kept we can go to the next slide. But he came the first day and then he kept coming back. And so the gigs are set up so that you could come one time and never come back and just get paid for that day, because it's like a double opt-in. So you come and you're like, oh, I like this. I like the work. I like the people. I want to come back. And work is done in crews. Even though it's a gig, you're not doing individual work. You're working with a team. So when you come, we're evaluating, you know, do you bring the right energy? Are you coming on time? Did you do the right set of preliminaries? And so there's an assessment that happens that allows us to also determine, are you a good fit right now for what we're trying to do? And so that double opt-in worked really well. And so for the next few weeks, you know, Darnell came back and then he was eligible to participate in paid training. And then ultimately there is where we were like, oh, wow, this guy, you know, it's not just that he shows up on time and has good energy. He really has leadership skills, and he's really curious about this space and how to grow. So we then, you know, so after about 6 weeks, he got promoted to be a crew leader. So that comes with an immediate bump in pay. He's not working with us full time at the moment. It's still hourly. But he's doing significantly more work, you know, just across the crews that we have between DC and Baltimore. His long-term aspiration is to run a landscaping company, kinda. You know, many people kind of have an aspiration to run their own show. But one of the things that is important as his next step that he didn't know about before is that, well, if you have a horticulture degree or certifications, that helps you run a more differentiated business. And then maybe you can be a contractor even, right, for some of these green stormwater infrastructure projects. And so the first time that we talked about community college, you know, Darnell was like, oh, I didn't know horticulture was a thing. Like he did. I mean, even though he has a background where the reason he works outside, it's not just that, oh, there's nothing else for him to do. His grandfather, you know, had him exposed to the outdoors, you know, at a very early age, right? Like they had animals, horses. So that was kind of in his background. And so naturally, it's just an area he gravitated to. Anyways, but one of the partnerships that we have is with the Baltimore County Community College, and they happen to be looking for a more diverse set of individuals to join their horticulture program. So we made that match, and he's going to start doing that in the next month. He begins like his first set of courses that will set him up, just for more options within horticulture landscaping. But all of that began just by him showing up for a 2-hour paid gig. And I think that kind of speaks to the bigger opportunity that we see for our partnership within sort of the DMV area. And, in general, when we think about models for how to include more individuals within stormwater and then just more broadly within the green economy. So I think, are we going to now maybe move on to maybe getting any questions and feedback from the audience? I think one other point is that the way that we are doing this initiative, hopefully what comes out is that it's not a workforce program where we're trying to connect people to busy work. Like, there's real work that needs to be done. And so making the match between the real work that needs to be done, but catering to the flexibility and the needs of a new generation. And there are many other needs that having hourly work helps to supplement. We didn't go into maybe a lot of the other, just familiar, there are many sort of environmental and community constraints that for some of our target demographic, hourly work just becomes a really critical thing to begin participation in the labor force. But being able to work in this way, if more stormwater programs adopt it, it also becomes, in addition to supplementing their labor force, it also becomes an opportunity to really think about new sources of funding. So a lot of the climate monies that are currently available are focused on what are the new ways that you're going to either impact communities or attract new talent. Like everything, all of the things that we've touched on in this talk are what the new climate funding is about. So I think if nothing else from this conversation, we'd love to explore how to work with more of you. But that's a lot of what's next for us. We're going to be doing more of these partnerships with municipalities.
Yeah, I think we wanted to sort of open this up now. And we really did want this to be a conversation. So there's some familiar faces in the or names in the chat. But we were hoping that you could tell us sort of, does this resonate with you for your programs, or do you see challenges, and you want us to address kind of what you see as an obstacle, or why it might not be a good fit, or why it might be. Any brave souls out there?
So I will say the participants, because it is a webinar, they don't have the ability to go to unmute themselves automatically. But if anyone, and if you'd like, if anyone has a specific example, because we definitely have the time, I can put folks off of mute, like specific individuals, or if anyone wants to engage their anecdotes or challenges in the chat, they're welcome to. I do see a question in the Q&A, so maybe we can start off with this one. So, interesting model. My work doesn't have a lot of, quote, gig opportunities, but what can we in the 9-to-5 world learn from your lessons in the gig world to attract unique workers that we're missing?
Yeah, I think that, Kala, the experiences you've had, maybe down in Newport News.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I talk to, is the right word, maybe traditional industry employers. So whether it's, sort of energy or, just across any, of the water utilities, to the extent that talent shortages across the board, at any level are a challenge, I think one of the gaps that I see is that there is a focus on maybe the traditional backgrounds, but or there's just not the realization of how much, for what I spoke to earlier about the distraction of the kind of options that young people are considering. And so if you have somebody who finished an engineering degree and they they're like, I could do your job, or I don't know, YouTube or whatever, but it's not because they don't have any other options, just that they have so many options. Then what does that mean for what your job needs to look like and what it needs to offer? One other maybe finding or thing that has come up in our work is the blurring of the lines between what blue collar means. And so I think, for the kind of maintenance work that we're talking about, sometimes, well, who are those backgrounds? And we tend to maybe think of folks that don't have degrees, but there's a blurring a little bit, so one of the internships that we had last summer in the Hampton Roads area was around just unblocking storm drains and proactively doing that in underserved neighborhoods so that an already overstressed, stretched system could, have some breathing room and you didn't suffer just from because the drains were blocked. The person doing that was an undergrad who understands GIS, who understands, how to use Python and coding, but her preferred work style, like how she want her, if she can design her ideal work week, she would want 60% of that to be like outside touching grass and maybe another 40%. So for a good part, she was just like killing it, right? It's like 1,000 storm drains, boom. Most of that is what she knocked out. But separately, we also looked at the issues that you get to connect to that are things like nuisance flooding, which I think many systems are just sort of getting up to speed on. And there's this sort of disconnect between nuisance flooding for the city and nuisance flooding in my backyard. And so, looking at things like what's the rainfall intensity level per hour that then triggers it being a problem for residents, and how do you increase that connection? So all of that to say, I think that there are creative ways that maybe a short 2-hour gig isn't what's needed, but I think for sure municipalities and the work that they do, it's a huge training ground in general for a range of backgrounds who, if they're in college right now, they're looking for ways to really like do something meaningful. And they're thinking about climate. And I think that a lot of the work that's done in stormwater is exactly the kind of immediate impact, work that many young people can connect to. And I think the proactive piece of it can't be underscored enough. So it's one thing to have, I guess a required inspection at a particular time, but this idea of taking a step, and, kind of seeing ahead and really understanding your communities enough so that you are doing things proactively, it delivers an additional level of benefit for residents, but that's what opens up some of these other opportunities to provide hands-on experiences. And I think in a world that's become so digital, what is premium separately is like, can I get some real world, experiences? And that's what a lot of you have, I think, as a differentiator to offer.
I think Beth Dutton asked sort of what's the advertising platform that you're using to get the word out that others might tap into, even if it's not gig. And I know we were using Craigslist.
It really does depend. Again, we go back and forth. So it depends on which system we're working with. And so we'll use, maybe social media, and maybe even something like Craigslist, but it depends on what is the job, who are you trying to target? This approach is meant to allow an employer to decide, right, where what pockets of community are they trying to invest into? And so then we would specifically recruit for that. One of the things that we, will launch, in another month or so is our first sort of chatbot version that kind of supports, some of the application for these jobs, but also builds in some more of the career awareness, like from the front. And I think maybe the final thing I'll say is we no matter which, I think, of the urban communities that we now work in, that we have done projects, we just have never had a shortage of interest. So we just want to work with more of you.
There is a question in the chat, and this is a really good one too. How do you get past the bias against the gig economy? In California, and welcome from California, we actually have laws that tamp down gig economy growth. Any ideas?
Well, I think like when we very first got started here, I'm sure, Kala, you have a lot to say, but I was not surprised at the pushback that we got from DPW, Public Works, the unions, and DDOT, transportation folks. And, they were really concerned that this was a vehicle to sort of lose good jobs, which I think is, generally the concern. But I think in this case, there's a clear permission that happens from the entities that have the concerns to where and what the gig workers can do, that ends up being really supplemental and helpful to them. Because if they're getting these constant like 311 complaints, and they don't have the staff to respond to it, or the hours or the capacity to respond to it, here they can get the gig workers are working in one of the most sort of litter intense areas. And I don't know if, Kala, did we see 311 calls go down in the areas that we've been working in, or is it not that?
Yeah, I don't know that we, in terms of tightly tying that piece of analysis, we didn't look at that very closely.
But I know that was part of the opening in the conversation, that it was going to be helpful and not harmful to, the union folks.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that really addresses the posit that there are, laws that prevent gig workers, but maybe it does. Maybe it's a way of framing it, not as, sometimes we call it like the Uber of stormwater, but it's because it's such a recognized service that the people we're trying to attract are comfortable using. So that's the motivation for kind of using the terminology rather than trying to displace.
Yeah. And I will add that, a part of that debate around the gig economy is a little bit of a, I think it's a little bit of a generational debate as well, because it touches on fundamentally, I understand the concerns around exploitation, right? Because some of that does happen. But I think that the other part of this is, what does like ultimate choice and flexibility look like? And, so we are like a very tiny player, right, in this space. We're not at the levels where we get to set policy. So one of the bets that I am making is that if we can demonstrate how this idea of blurring working and learning means that we also are a new model for workforce development. It's not just a new way of working for work's sake. When we talk to the workforce development folks as well, instead of, like the traditional utility apprenticeships that the unions have, and I guess for good reason, those apprenticeships have evolved in a particular way where, man, it's got to be years and years of you training, right, under this particular system before you get to touch things in a real way. And one of the big forcing factors that we started this conversation with about this decentralized infrastructure for stormwater, it's like across our green economy, the new energy infrastructure, it's like all decentralized. And so it's got an entirely different political infrastructure, an entirely different HR dynamic that is not locked in, because the people who have this infrastructure, they're like, well, listen, we're trying to move fast here for climate. We're trying to we need to put these things in and they need to be maintained. Are the systems that we have right now fit for purpose, where for 5 years I need to apprentice before I can now be the person responsible for a little micro garden, right? So I think there's a tension around a lot of so I think one of the things that we're betting on is first that for the 50 million plus new pieces of infrastructure that are being installed and funded for climate, that is a whole new operating space where we need to move fast and get things done, and it provides a training ground. And so we're betting that we can play in that space. We're also betting that for any of the hesitations, and I think they come from a good place, because the idea is that we want people to have good lives, right? I think most of the hesitations about the gig economy come from the bad examples. But I'm betting that if you can also realize that there's a real need for many different reasons to have flexibility and choice. And it tends to be that for maintenance kind of roles and blue collar roles, that's where we tend to be very prescriptive, right? You don't just get to test things out and decide if I like it or not. You kind of get told what to do. But if we if we change that whole paradigm where there's ultimate choice, might that just create a more robust economy in general, because people are able to really find where they fit and be their best selves. And so if we can demonstrate more Darnell stories, right? The Darnell story is still being written, it's not done. But if we can demonstrate that, were it not for a program like that, right, that you wouldn't have Darnell progressing the way that he is, if we can tell more of those stories, I'm just betting that those two forces will be enough to not get us totally shut down, but we'll see, you know.
There's a question here. Are workers paid as employees? They are paid through a DOEE, the grant that is paying us.
1099.
They're paid as 1099s.
Yeah.
And I know that early on there was some conversation about benefits and things like that. But that is there any movement in that direction?
I mean, I think at scale, increasingly across the broader gig economy, I mean, I think there are flex plans and that kind of thing that's happening. And so, I mean, I think for who we grow up to be, we'll probably have more bargaining power to consider those things. But it's at the moment, you know, a lot of for where we are, I think as a tech platform is kind of getting to our next sort of growth stage so that we can do more of this. But I think for sure, as those needs arise, we're very ultimately our North Star is, you know, who do we need to be to make somebody like Darnell win, right? Like anytime anything kind of gets confusing, like, are we working for Darnell today? Like, did we make the right decisions so that he can, you know, get the opportunities that he needs? And so I think naturally over time, some of the, I guess traditional worker protection things will, you know, increasingly become sort of top of focus as we sort of, you know, grow in size. But there's nothing that's really off the table when I think about, you know, the kinds of things that we might need to do, but we just sort of have a practical reality of not being the size of an Uber today and just looking to grow.
Yeah, and I just responded, there was a question about who actually makes the payments and a question for clarification. So get the payment comes to, so the way that the grant is structured, the landscape company, TCG Property Cares, they received the award. So the award was open to for-profits as well as nonprofits.
Yeah, and we front the payment. So we're paying in advance and then at some point getting government monies. So the gig workers get paid the same day. They don't see any of our back end government payment schedules things. They just see, I came today, I got paid today, no headache. So
And I think that's critical to the whole thing, because,
yeah.
that's why people are showing up.
Yeah.
Right. And then there was a question. Yeah, so Frontline makes the payment right away and then submits an invoice to DCG.
Yep.
They submit an invoice to DOE. And
Yes.
then eventually we all get paid,
Eventually.
hopefully before we go out of business.
I think we have time probably for one or two more, and there was a sort of comment question in the chat about the use of the app and about sort of the things that they would be looking for to see on the app before signing up. Who am I doing this work for? Why am I doing this work? As well as things like, where is recommended parking? What will the conditions be like? Will I be working on the side of the road or in a field? Things like that to help decide which job I will sign up for. Do you have any comments on sort of that comment?
Yeah, no, those are all great comments. We have, we provide, and the way that we are working right now, so that the app guides the signups, and then, we use sort of text and chat guidance once you are signed up for your gig. But I think in general, all of the comments are great. But you get, a message that tells you all of those details, but everything that you're thinking about in terms of those details are all great comments. And as we're building out, just working to get better at how we do that. But a lot of that right now, once you get approved for a gig, then you get a note that kind of some of it is on the app itself, and then you also get reminders and notes via text to guide the journey.
Is there any move, or do you think there would be the ability for them to have some of this information sort of before they get accepted to the gig, before they, sign up for it?
Yes. And so some of that, I think is included in the actual gig description on the platform.
Mm.
There's a question about no-shows. Are there no-shows when there might be better opportunity financially?
No, that's a good point. I mean, we've had one or two no-shows, and a part of that goes into sort of the record. And as so for Oxen Run, for example, what ends up happening is that there's now, you kind of quickly, after a couple of gigs, you're like, there are folks who want to come back all the time. And so we end up balancing sort of the core guys who kind of want to make us like a fixed part of their week with maybe rotating some new folks in. And so, that balance kind of happens because the goal is that because it's, that particular gig is super entry level, that really any able body would be, offer eligible. But yeah, so the no shows and a part of that for some of the work that we have happening in the back, there's a lot of sort of behavioral profiling and other things that we are, working on as algorithmically to sort of test out. Because ultimately the individuals who are doing gigs, every time they come out, they're building out a profile. And, if their intent is maybe to seek full-time work, then that profile becomes something that we are using to then match them to employers and other training opportunities, kind of the next thing after this gig. And so, if somebody comes as a no-show, it's unfortunate, but then we kind of know like, all right, I mean, that, that person isn't our person. But today, that's not the biggest challenge that we end up having.
It's more the demand side, right? Like there's more people that want to participate in the gigs than we have funding and, on the ground opportunities to support. So, yeah, I think we're pretty close to
Yep,
Or-
we're getting close to the cutoff time. Just a reminder that actually, let me stop the recording.